Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon which part of the world you are joining us today for this exciting session on the Virtual Ocean Pavilion at COP26. My name is Dr. Peter Ricketts, and I'm President and Vice Chancellor of Acadia University in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. You can see a picture of our campus on the shores of the Minas Basin and the Bay of Fundy with the highest tides in the world. And we're in a part of Canada called Atlantic Canada on the east coast, and Nova Scotia refers to itself as Canada's ocean playground. So we're very much in the coastal zone and in the ocean part of Eastern Canada. It's a great pleasure for me to be moderating this session, which is entitled Ocean and Adaptation and Resilience: Creating and Implementing the Enabling Conditions for Action through Science, Capacity Building, and Other Cross-Cutting Approaches. We have an exciting panel here today with 10 speakers who will be addressing us on various aspects of this important theme, particularly as we know how important the issue of capacity building is as we implement adaptation and mitigation efforts for climate change. We will be divided into two parts. We will start off with 5 speakers, and then we will have a little break, sort of an intermission with a short video, and then we will go into the second session, which will have another 5 speakers. After each of the 5 speaker sessions, we'll have a question and answer session so that those of you who are attending are able to put questions to the panelists. And I ask you to write, if you have a question, please write it in the Q&A part of the component of the Zoom. And please indicate to whom you are addressing your question. And I'm very pleased that Miko Maikawa of the Ocean Policy Research Institute in Tokyo, Japan, will be moderating the question and answer session and helping me address your questions. And we'll deal with as many questions as we can. But we do have a lot to go through today, and so I'm very conscious of the time. And I want to provide as much time as possible for our speakers to get their presentations and to have you ask your questions in the sessions. And so it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker, who is our keynote speaker for this morning. And this is Mr. Henry Puna, who is the 10th General Secretary of the Pacific Islands Forum. As Secretary General, he is responsible to the Pacific Islands Forum leaders to deliver their priorities. He is also the Pacific Oceans Commissioner and the chair of the Council of Regional Organizations of the Pacific. Prior to taking up this forum role on the 24th of May in 2021, Secretary General Puna was the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands from November 2010 until October 2020. So it's my great pleasure now to welcome Mr. Henry Puna and ask him to give the keynote address.
Thank you very much, moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, warm Pacific greetings to you all. And thank you for the opportunity to join you all through this virtual event. And I welcome those of you joining us online from right around the world today. Let me begin by saying that it's very alarming to note that ocean heat has reached record levels. Indeed, in 2020 alone, more than 80% of the world's oceans experienced marine heat waves. Relatedly, the cryosphere continues to decline at alarming rates. Greenland ice loses an average of 278 gigatons a year. The Arctic sea ice has reached an all-time low, and refreezing has been the slowest on record. Why, you might wonder, am I going on about the cryosphere this morning? Simple, friends. it is because of our oceans. I have always viewed the Pacific region as this planet's ocean continent. It is home to a diversity of people, places, and cultures. It is my home and home to many Pacific Islanders who are here at COP26 to fight not for their own survival, but for that of their future generations. For us, the ocean is our greatest resource. It is our source of livelihood. However, today, we as a region stand face to face with the climate crisis, a crisis that continues to wear down our communities, swallow up our islands, and threatens to wipe our very existence off the face of this earth. Friends, the declining state of our cryosphere is being felt at the very heart of our Pacific Ocean, with alarming rates of sea level rise. In parallel, our oceans are continually plagued with destructive human activity, including overfishing, dumping, and plastic waste, just to name a few, and ocean acidity continues to intensify. Biodiversities are collapsing. Ecosystems are disappearing. I ask you today, what more will it take for humanity to pay attention? How much more do we need to lose before the ambitious climate action we need to see will actually be realized? How many more coastal communities need to pay nature's price for the ongoing economic advancement of larger developed countries? Is it a coincidence that 70% of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world today are the most politically and economically fragile? Friends, the root cause of the state of our planet today is human activity. We are the masters of our own fate and the detriment of our own futures. And as such, the only solution to this crisis is you and me, us together. Humanity needs to work together to find a way forward that will ensure that we can secure the future for our children and their children. Dear friends, if we are to truly accomplish this and address the climate crisis before us, we need to appreciate and respect the inextricable link between the ocean and our climate. We have for too often now overlooked the value of the ocean in our climate discussions. We have limited our focus to anthropogenic activity and emissions, and have disregarded the role of the ocean as a natural climate regulator in these important conversations. And as a result, the health of our oceans continue to drastically decline on our watch. We will be held accountable for this if we do not take action now. The time is ripe and indeed necessary for a holistic conversation on the ocean climate nexus. This conversation needs to happen where it matters most, within the multilateral processes that will ensure that these commitments are realized and put into action. Friends, today, humanity stands at a juncture in world history. Every action we take now will have consequences on our future. We cannot and we should not delay any longer. Now is not the time for excuses. Now is not the time for political showboating and delays. Now is the time for action. The science has spoken. We just cannot ignore it. Friends, to address the climate crisis would be to simultaneously contribute to and strengthen the health of our ocean. Therefore, let me reaffirm again the three imperatives that we need to realize now. First, global carbon neutrality. We need to achieve this within the next 3 decades. Secondly, we need to realize the ambition of the Paris Agreement on climate finance. Thirdly, we need to deliver on adaptation. This is absolutely critical, particularly for those of us who are faced with combating the climate crisis on a daily basis. Together, I am sure we can achieve this. Indeed, we must achieve this. However, the reality is that no matter what outcomes are delivered here in COP26, our climate will keep changing. Our seas will continue to warm and to rise. Our coral reefs will continue to bleach and die. Our people will continue to suffer distress from more intense weather-related events, loss of livelihoods and food security, and deteriorating levels of well-being. The onus is clearly now on us to do what must be done. Friends, with all that in mind, allow me to share with you a few key initiatives that we continue to progress here in the Pacific region. As you will all be familiar, for Pacific Islanders, conservation is our traditional way of life. By protecting our ecosystems, we conserve our cultural heritage and ensure that we can pass that heritage on to future generations. It is in this light that we have undertaken to establish marine protected areas throughout the Pacific. When I was Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, we declared our whole EEZ of close to 2 million square kilometers as the Marae Moana, or Sacred Ocean. Indeed, for me, the Marae Moana was our opportunity to explore how best to take resourcing decisions on an integrated management through a precautionary approach. Innovation and technology will be critical for us island nations. We have more ocean than land, and therefore we must continually explore ways and means to look to the ocean for our long-term sustainable economic and social development. At a regional level, and recognizing the potential impact of sea level rise on our sovereignty and our boundaries, our forum leaders have endorsed a declaration to preserve our maritime zones in the face of climate-related sea level rise. The declaration affirms that whether or not sea levels are rising, once maritime boundaries are set and deposited with the UN Secretary General, they should not and shall not be altered. This is a landmark instrument that will shape international thinking. I call on all of you to support the declaration as a practical and considered solution to address a very complex and dire consequence of climate change. Indeed, this declaration is in line with the strong political commitment that forum leaders have made on oceans this year. We have committed to responsibly and effectively manage 100% of the Blue Pacific Ocean within and beyond national jurisdiction, based on the best available scientific information and traditional knowledge. 100% of our waters, ladies and gentlemen, no less. Effective management and conservation of marine ecosystems require coherent ocean governance in place both within and beyond national jurisdictions. The 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, currently being developed, will certainly work towards making this a reality. It will support holistic management of our ocean. It will contribute to effective adaptation and mitigation measures. And it will contribute to improving the resilience of our Blue Pacific continent and our planet as a whole. This new strategy will certainly benefit from an ambitious treaty on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, BBNJ. Our leaders are strongly supporting that negotiations successfully conclude in 2022, and for this new treaty to enter into force at the earliest opportunity. Excellencies, dear friends, if there is one issue that you may wish to take with you from my remarks today, It is this: humanity must take action now. Take action on climate and take action to restore the health of our world's largest natural climate regulator, our oceans. That said, I look forward to hearing and learning from what other regions are doing and getting inspired. We're all in this together, so let us all work together to save our blue planet. I thank you for your time and wish you all a good Nature and Ocean Day at COP26. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for that powerful keynote address and your clarion call to action. I want to thank you also for your leadership and for the leadership of your region, and only say that I wish you'd been listened to decades ago, because you have been giving this message for so long, and the lack of action, of course, is now coming home to roost in very, very serious ways. And I really appreciate your opening comments. It sets the scene for this discussion beautifully. So thank you so much, Your Excellency, for those very, very powerful remarks, and a call to action for all of us. I now have the pleasure of introducing myself, which is a bit odd, but I am the next speaker. I'm going to try and keep my remarks very short so that we can try and keep to time a bit more. And in addition to being president of Acadia University, I'm also a professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences and Geography, and I have been working in ocean and coastal management and coastal issues all of my academic life. So this is something that is very passionate for me. I'm going to just share my screen. So this is a little test for all the other speakers who. Okay, I hope you can see that. Can you? Great. So I'm just going to, my topic is on assessing progress on ocean and climate adaptation and resilience, 2020 to 2021. And I just want to recognize the work of Amelia Gansland, who was an undergraduate research assistant for me when she was at Acadia University, and she is now completing her, she did her degree in environmental history and environmental sustainability. And she's now doing her master's degree at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. What my presentation is really about is to address your attention to what we call the Roker report. And this is the roadmap to Ocean and Climate Action initiative that was begun in the immediately following the COP21 in Paris after the Paris Agreement, where the oceans were added to the framework. And the ROCA was really developed to try and influence the implementation of the Paris Agreement regarding oceans and coasts, and to try and raise the profile and mobilize signatories to the roadmap to come together and push for more inclusion and of oceans in the climate change negotiations. And of course, those actions did culminate at the last COP25 in Madrid under the Chile presidency with a very powerful statement in the final communique supporting oceans. So the ROCA report, or the roadmap rather, began in 2016, and each year since then, the Global Oceans Forum and other partners have coordinated a progress report, an annual progress report, which has been delivered at each of the Ocean Action Days at the COP meetings. This year, the 2020-21 report is really more than an annual report, because the initiative was initially a 5-year initiative. So we're at the end of that 5-year initiative. And so in some ways, the 2021 progress report is a bit of a reflection on the past 5 years and where we have come in terms of progress on ocean and climate action. You can see the number of participants and contributors to this are significant. They are global. They are at all levels and from different sectors that are supporting ocean work and coastal work. And so it really, I think one of the great successes of the ROCA has been this increasing collaboration across the globe in raising the voice of ocean and trying to get delivered some of the powerful messages that we just heard from His Excellency Puna. This year's report is also dedicated to the memory and legacy of Biljana. Biljana Sisson-Sain, was a giant in her field, and we would be nowhere close to where we are today without her efforts. And of course, she would say that we're nowhere near close enough, and so the work must continue, and we owe it to Biljana to make sure that we continue to deliver on what she wanted, which was nothing less than what General Secretary Puna has just told us about, which is that incredible call to action and the sense of urgency. The progress report has an introduction, and I think Miriam is going to put in the link to the ROCA report in the chat, so that if you would like to go to this report, I do encourage you to look at it. It has over the years developed and become what I think is one of the most comprehensive reviews and summaries of ocean and climate action activities anywhere around, and it really has become a major document. It's divided into a number of sections, and each of the reports over the years has addressed all of these issues, although there are a few additional sections have been added. So for example, the new scientific findings on ocean and climate was added to the reports after the 1.5 degree centigrade report of the IPCC, and then again, of course, the Oceans and Cryosphere report, and then more recently, the most recent update on climate change, and and a big part of the initial reports was to promote the central role of oceans in climate, and that's kind of more evolved now into assessing the new scientific findings and also looking at the central role of nationally determined contributions. So what you'll see from the table of contents here, that the ROCA report really does have a comprehensive assessment of all of the major aspects of ocean and climate change and the ocean climate nexus. In this particular report, there's a bit of an addition, of course, down at the bottom there, ocean climate change and COVID-19, dealing with that, and of course last year the ROCA report was delayed because of COVID. And then a summary, because really we need to now look, well, what's next for ROCA? We've completed the 5 years, so where do we go from here?
The roadmap was developed.
And the adaptation, in terms of the section that I was involved in particular, that Amelia was involved in, on adaptation. And really, I think one of the interesting things, what we've seen, if we look at the ROCA reports over the years, what we see is that the section on adaptation has grown from a number of examples and perhaps rather American-centric and Eurocentric examples to a global assessment of adaptation. What we have seen is really an explosion of adaptation measures right around the world, although some of it is more to do with knowing more as to what's going on around the world. But certainly, when you look at the different progress reports, and I think what's key about the current summary is that as the impacts of climate change have become more and more intense and more frequent, then of course we're seeing in greater initiatives to adapt and to become more resilient to those impacts. And so the kinds of impacts that Secretary General Puna was talking about, which in the in the Pacific Islands have been dealing with this for decades. We're now seeing these kinds of intensities occurring elsewhere, and with communities and coastal regions becoming far more exposed and more vulnerable to catastrophic change. We're now seeing adaptation processes develop, and we're looking at seeing new ways of dealing with it. And on the list there are a number of ways in which we've identified different adaptations that are occurring around the world and at different levels of government. And I think one of the interesting things that's happened over the period of the Roca report is the fact that we now see more what I would call sort of integrated approaches, where adaptation is being mixed, combined with mitigation measures and with low carbon economy or blue economy measures to in order to help communities become more resilient to the increasing threats that are occurring, both in terms of coastal exposure to storms and sea level rise, but also with the devastating impacts that we're seeing on ecosystems, marine habitats, and of course on the impact on commercial fishery resources and artisanal fishery resources. So the section on adaptation, I think, provides a really good summary of what has been happening over the last 5 years and where we sit now. There are, I think, three kind of key messages, though, that are still there. The first one is that although marine spatial planning has become much more prevalent and more important, and we're seeing an interesting network of MSPs around the world, it's still not seen yet as part of the kind of climate adaptation strategy. It's still seen as a bit of an outsider. And quite frankly, I think the commitment of the Pacific to look at 100% of their waters as for conservation and protection and for marine planning, I think that's a goal that we should look at around the world. But as yet, we're not there yet in terms of seeing that integrated into typical adaptation approaches. Secondly, integrated ocean and coastal management is not widely included as essential to the effective implementation of adaptation and mitigation. And I think that, again, as the impacts of climate change become more and more severe and more frequent and intense, really doing adaptation measures in isolation, is becoming increasingly ineffective, and we need more integrated approaches to ocean and coastal management. But we do see examples of these increasing around the world, both at subnational level and at national level, and also at multinational level. And then finally, we need better understanding of how marine and fisheries management tools can be implemented more effectively to help vulnerable communities adapt and become more resilient to climate change. So these are just a few of the findings and the outcomes of the Roca report, but I do encourage you to get onto the link and to look at that report in detail, because it really does provide a fantastic overview, and I think it's a report that Biljana would have been proud of. So now I'm going to just stop sharing my screen. And I would now like to move to our next speaker, who is Mrs. Angelique Pouponneau. And Angelique is the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, SECAT. Angelique is a lawyer practicing in the Seychelles and also licensed in the UK. And she holds an LLM in environmental law, specializing in the law of the sea and natural resources law. She is a trained climate change negotiator under the AOSIS Climate Change Fellowships Program at the United Nations, and she is currently the AOSIS coordinator for response measures. So I'd now like to invite Angelique to make her remarks.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So thank you very much. And I'm calling in from COP on Oceans Day. So it's all very exciting. And thank you so much for reminding us of Biljana. I was wondering what was missing or who was missing to all of this. And it really came home. So with regards to my remarks, I just wanted to share looking at partnerships in implementing nature-based solutions. And the Seychelles is one such example where we are very keen, and we know as a small island developing state that although we're very ambitious and we absolutely appreciate the importance of nature-based solutions, we cannot do it alone. So I'll be talking about our small island or big ocean state's journey towards ocean climate resilience and how partnerships is central to all of this. So of course, and I don't think it serves repeating that nature-based, but just for repeating, nature-based solutions holds the promise of safeguarding communities, the climate, but at the same time, a thread of meaningful partnerships and climate justice must be embedded. While we are all familiar with the term capacity building, and this has come up, I've started to think about the concept more about meaningful partnerships. And I know within the UN space, there isn't the appetite, of course, to change that, because of course, we've been using capacity building for so long. But it's quite interesting that everybody has their own understanding. There's also a strange connotation that capacity building must always be from north to south, when there's clearly a mutual building of capacity as we engage in different capacity building or capacity development initiatives. So I just want to, I've been thinking about that and thinking about how we're embarking on these ambitious projects. We're also thinking about how we're building capacity. We're making sure that the local communities, the people on the ground, are not only beneficiaries, but they're part of co-designing. They're part of co-designing, co-generation of these solutions, because at the end of the day, they know the place best. So as already mentioned, my name is Angelique Pupono, and I'm from the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, SECAT. We're very much a public-private partnership. So as you can imagine, partnerships is at the heart of our DNA. We have been created by our two original founders, the national government, as well as the Nature Conservancy. And because of this PPP, because of this very nature of our existence, we're able to bring national government, NGOs, impact investors, development banks together. And we hosted a really excellent event here at COP, actually bringing all these actors together and having a discussion about access to finance for small island developing states. But I get distracted. It was such a great event. In 2015, the government of Seychelles partnered with the Nature Conservancy and SECAT for a debt for nature swap for ocean conservation, a first of its kind. And this is where Seychelles also agreed that it would designate 30% of its EEZ as marine protected areas. This was linked to a $21.6 million debt restructure that was able to provide $6.6 million towards projects supporting ocean conservation and climate adaptation. To date, with the debt for nature swap, as well as the sovereign blue bonds, another innovative financing initiative, SECAT is able to disperse $700,000 as grants. But as I mentioned, such initiatives require partnerships. And it's important to appreciate all the partnerships. This is not only about having the donor and having the recipient. This is really about having policymakers, scientists, academics, educators, the funders, the working together in order to come up with these solutions. So it's just some examples of how partnerships has really helped us to address knowledge, research, and monitoring gap in our nature-based solution work. through our Blue Grants Fund, which is one of the funds that we have a competitive request for proposal. We have partnered with the James Michel Foundation, which has produced a literature review on blue carbon research in the tropical Western Indian Ocean, which has identified key research gaps that needs to be addressed. Step one. The next step is we're working together with the Pew Charitable Trust. We're working together with the University of Oxford, the University of Seychelles, local NGOs to be able to fill some of that knowledge gap relating to seagrass meadows. So SECAT is coordinating a project to map the entire exclusive economic zone of Seychelles of above ground and below ground carbon stock. This initiative has led to another nature-based solution commitment within the nationally determined contribution of the Seychelles. The Seychelles has committed to protect 50% of coastal wetlands by 2025 and 100% by 2030. The latter commitment has a caveat, should finance be available. Because in order to achieve this work, finance and capacity building is going to be critical. What we don't want is a situation of what we typically call parachute science, having people flown into the country, doing the work, telling us how much seagrass there is, telling us this is the data, much of which we're not taught how to understand, and telling us what the data means, not being taught how to actually do the methodologies, how to update our carbon inventories. This is exactly what we didn't want. So through this partnership, we're actually working in a collaborative way with all the stakeholders that I've mentioned, all the partners that I've mentioned, in order to do this right. So we are having international experts and local experts working together. The equipment's being financed, that's going to be left behind. There's continuous knowledge transfer. And no, I don't mean knowledge transfer only from north to south, international to local, but really, this would not be possible without the people on the ground who have the local knowledge, including fishers, about our ecosystems. But what's important to say is, of course, that these are the Seychelles' natural resources. We must understand how to collect the data, how to interpret the data, and how to use the data in order to inform our international and national policy making and national policies. And that's critical. Otherwise, we continue to remain dependent on the external world. But just to say that these are not just conversations happening on the ground. I'm in and out of negotiation rooms, and it's all the same when it comes to in the international sphere, COP26. We're discussing finance, technology transfer, capacity building. How effective are these capacity building initiatives? SIDS in particular, we've been going on about how we don't want to be a dump site for old technologies that are no longer useful to advanced economies, and then deeming it technology transfer, and making sure that there's also quality and quantity and available funding. I just want to check if there's a note. I'll read the chat in a moment. So Seychelles sees itself, and SECAT in particular, that we're a negotiator of partnerships. You know, we're able to connect these international aspirations to the ground. So through SECAT, a locally managed independent trust fund, Seychelles has developed relationships with local leaders, foreign experts to build independent knowledge on blue carbon efforts. Most importantly, this demonstrates the importance of negotiating deals with mutual gain, identifying what each partner needs out of the deal, but also how this also addresses any issues of equity and justice. We really need to think about this issue of justice in the design of partnerships, or equitable and meaningful partnerships used to implement nature-based solutions. Because of course, when you talk about protecting vast expanses of coastal marine habitats, we need to really understand and reconcile the community usage and the decisions about management, inclusion, and to an extent, how if others are being excluded. Together with colleagues from Vermont Law School and the University of Oxford Seascape Ecology Lab, we grappled with these issues in a recently published article about the need for climate just ocean commitments under the Paris Agreement. Many of these ocean commitments focused on nature-based solutions like blue carbon to achieve climate resilience. We need a framework to implement the ocean commitments, and that framework must center on climate justice across all disciplines and in the way that we do our scientific research, how we establish our governance systems, and how we design our financing mechanisms. In our article, I leveraged my lived experience working as an ocean leader in a small island to identify how we can better center climate justice and meaningful partnerships. Implementing these nature-based solutions like blue carbon requires partnerships that are designed with the following core attributes. Traditional and local ecological knowledge is valued and on par with Western science. It is so interesting that somehow someone who has lived in this area, used this land, becomes secondary to someone who has sat in their study or a library somewhere in Washington or London, and somehow their knowledge is more valued. That cannot be the case. And I'm not saying that there needs to be one that is superior than the other, but definitely equally valued in understanding the ecosystems and working together. My grandmother, that elder, she must be at that table with that dynamic young scientist flying in from London. And neither of them should feel inferior, but definitely they should be treated equally in understanding how we undertake these nature-based solutions. Laws and policies that centers around vulnerable communities. As a matter of course, having to protect or sustainably manage these large areas requires the community. For a small island developing state, we do not have the resources to be investing in large amounts of technologies to make sure that there's no poaching. It's the communities that have to buy in. They need to understand, and in Seychelles, we have a very consultative marine spatial planning process. They need to understand and be part of the process and why it's important to protect these areas. Once they're part of that decision-making process, they've bought in. They were there when it was decided that a certain area would be protected. So they have no reason to then say, well, I'm going to fish in the marine park anyway. They were at the table. They agreed. They understood why these decisions were being made. When it comes to financial mechanisms, a very sensitive topic, and one always has to be very pragmatic when it comes to financial mechanisms. But of course, these mechanisms must respect national sovereignty, value local cultures, and support sustainable economic development. The Seychelles negotiation serves as an example of how this type of financial mechanism structure results in a consultative process that facilitates capacity building and marine spatial planning. I mentioned this, and just to give you a very concrete example, when we decided as a country to protect 30% of the exclusive economic zone, while that was of course, a high-level commitment, it was decided which areas, what activities would be allowed through a marine spatial planning process. We're talking about 6 years and over 200 meetings in order to agree which areas would be protected. So as we work to include ocean in the climate negotiations and nature-based solutions like blue carbon in our pledges to fight climate crisis, we need to keep meaningful partnerships and capacity building front and center. Our solutions are not solutions if they're not equitable and just. I have hope for the power of people and nature to solve the climate crisis and to achieve resilience using our scientific, legal, and financial tools. But as we know, partnerships are inherent if we are to achieve resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angelique. Another very powerful presentation statement, and thank you for raising the issue of traditional knowledge. It's something that we're dealing with very directly here in Canada, with working with Indigenous First Nations and people in Canada, and appreciate that very much. Excellent presentation. Now going to move to our next presenter, which is Jill Hamilton. And Jill Hamilton is the Director for Blue Climate Strategy at Conservation International, where she leads the implementation of strategic international policy-based approaches and programs related to blue carbon, coastal and ocean adaptation, green-gray infrastructure, and ocean climate integration. And Jill is going to speak on building on the ocean climate dialogue options for strengthening action on the ocean under the UNFCCC. So I'll hand it over to you, Jill.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to all the speakers who came before me. I'm really excited to be here today. And I'll keep my remarks brief. I know we're a little bit tight on time. So as Peter said, I'm Director of Blue Climate Strategy at Conservation International. And CI is really working to advance natural climate solutions as a key tool for addressing climate change. Over a decade ago now, CI realized the carbon mitigation potential of blue carbon ecosystems. And these, of course, as you all know, are your mangroves, your seagrass beds, your tidal marshes. And since then, we've been working with IUCN and IOC UNESCO, along with many other partners, to launch the Blue Carbon Initiative. And last year, we also started the Global Green-Gray Community of Practice, which really seeks to bring together diverse partners working in green or ecosystem-based infrastructure approaches to adaptation, and your traditional gray infrastructure, which are those more traditional engineering-based approaches to really find innovative solutions to adaptation, particularly in coastal areas. As Secretary General Puna said in his opening remarks, we too often have overlooked the value of the ocean in our climate discussions. And so leading up to COP, and I'm actually calling in from Glasgow as well, we put together with IUCN, with RARE, with World Wildlife Fund, and several other partners, a paper that really digs in and looks at, what actions can parties take at COP26 to strengthen the ocean climate nexus and to really, bring forth sustained and ongoing action on the ocean under the UNFCCC. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of the high-level recommendations from that paper and also dig into a couple of details if we have time, but I believe the paper was just shared in the chat, so I won't go too into detail and would welcome any follow-up conversations after this talk. So there are a lot of options at this COP to really integrate oceans and climate into the ongoing negotiations and ongoing agenda items. The first piece that's really crucial and has been spoken to in several of the previous talks is really strengthening finance for the ocean climate nexus and for action in this space. Looking at the overall financial needs to solve the climate solutions, broader than just oceans, we're not nearly there, but particularly looking at coastal and ocean ecosystems, there is a huge gap. So to this end, parties should really call on the relevant bodies, including the Standing Committee on Finance, to explore the extent of financial flows to coastal and ocean ecosystems and identify those key gaps, particularly for marine and coastal nature-based solutions, and identify actionable opportunities to increase the needed finance flows. This is a key first step. Also, a key step, particularly in the space of adaptation, is really incorporating ocean and coastal issues and ocean and climate issues into scientific processes. The global stocktake will get started and kick off next year, and ensuring that oceans and coasts and the questions that are really pertinent to adaptation of these ecosystems, as well as mitigation, really need to be included so that relevant and actionable science can take place, particularly through the work on research and systematic observation. And finally, as many of you have been tuning into COP this week may have heard, parties should really call for the establishment of a formal and regular forum to continue discussing ocean and climate issues under the UNFCCC. Last December, the first virtual ocean climate dialogue was held, and it really helped recognize and bring to light the importance of this issue that has been reflected in all of the remarks today. Establishing a formal annual recurring dialogue on these issues would really ensure that we have a space to continue these discussions into the future, because these ecosystems are so crucial and need to be a part of the solution. So those are the high level points that I wanted to make. As you'll dig into this paper, we make recommendations on how parties can incorporate ocean and coasts into their national adaptation plans, into nationally determined contributions, and into bodies like the Nairobi Work Program and the Adaptation Committee. But I won't dig into that anymore today. So thank you, and back to you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jill, and very much appreciate your comments. And as Jill said, the link to her paper is in the chat there. Thank you very much. Very important points. Our next speaker, as we're running on time, I think what I'm going to do is have our next speaker, and then I think we'll go straight to the video. I don't see any questions in the Q&A at this point, so I think there were a couple maybe submitted before the session, but we should be able to do that towards the end. Our next speaker is Professor Manuel Barangay, and Manuel is the director of the Fisheries and Aquaculture Division at FAO, and is responsible for FAO's biennial State of the World Fisheries and Aquaculture, or SOFIA, report. Previously, he was Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Science at the Plymouth Marine Lab in the UK, and chair of the Science Committee of the International Council for the Exploration of the Sea, or ICES. Manuel will be speaking on supporting climate adaptation and resilience for food security through blue transformation. So I'll hand it over to Manuel for your comments. Good to see you.
Thank you, Peter. Good to see you too, and good morning, everybody. As it's been mentioned, I work for FAO, which is the UN specialized agency in charge of ending hunger and poverty. So I will focus on this topic. You can see the headquarters of FAO behind me. I'm in Rome at the moment. Now, FAO fights hunger by using natural resources, including from oceans, from rivers and lakes, in a sustainable manner for global food and nutrition security, as well as socioeconomic development. We all know that the problem of climate change cannot be resolved without mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, and this is an absolute priority. But we must not leave adaptation behind, because without adaptation, hunger and poverty will increase dramatically. We have a duty to act. Now, this is at the heart of the Paris Agreement's thinking, actually, because in its Article 2, it states that we must increase our ability to adapt in a manner that does not threaten food production. As the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, pointed out in her very powerful speech this week, adaptation finance is running at 25% of the promises. But coordinated adaptation is as important as bringing the required finance. The FAO has been implementing adaptation programs for the fisheries and aquaculture sector in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in Southern Africa, and in Southeast Asia for a number of years now. I will not provide details of these programs as such, but it suffices to say that they built on what we call a FAO adaptation toolbox, which is focused on three main adaptation entries. First, promoting institutional and management adaptations. This includes tackling things like the need for transboundary management arrangements through bilateral or regional means, also adjusting management systems to cope with the expected distributional changes in resources as a result of climate change. Second, providing livelihood adaptation options, and that is livelihood diversification, alternatives both inside and outside the sector to support vulnerable communities. And the third entry point is reducing and management risks through early warning systems, social protection systems, and community insurance arrangements. Now, adaptation is place and context-based, but this common framework allows for consistency and complementarity. My adaptation must not make my neighbor's adaptation more difficult. But adaptation is also not something to be imposed. It is a process as much as an ending point, a process that needs to be co-designed and co-delivered with local communities who are the stewards of the ocean and its resources. I also want to dispel the idea that adaptation is about weathering storms or minimizing impacts. It's not. Science has proven that effective adaptation is a positive step that can increase benefits as long as we adjust to the expected changes proactively. Now, Is this different from what we would do anyway in the absence of climate change to sustainably use fisheries and aquaculture, you may ask? To that, I say two things. First, that not all is different, because doing right what we are currently doing wrong, or partially wrong because there is now a more powerful reason for doing it right, is also good adaptation. And second, that what is new is to approach adaptation in a way to transform the way we grow, we catch, we process, and we consume food. A transformation which is a mindset that is needed if we are to feed a world of 10 billion people in a couple of decades. FAO and its partners are currently working on a blue transformation global agenda to secure aquatic food supply and sustainability. A transformation that incorporates social and economic solutions with principles of economic restoration to secure food from aquatic systems. Blue transformation focuses on active interventions with three very specific and well-thought climate resilient objectives. First, a sustainable expansion of aquaculture as an effective mechanism for both adaptation to climate change and opportunity for food security achievements. This expansion must be particularly focused on food deficit regions. Second, transforming fisheries through better management. We aim to ensure that 100% of seascapes and aquatic scapes are under effective and equitable management, as our keynote speaker, His Excellency Henry Puna, mentioned today, because we know that when management is in place, resources rebuilt, and rebuilt resources not only feed more people, they also are more resilient to climate change. And third, improving efficiency, viability, and inclusiveness of fish value chains. Too much fish is wasted between sea and plate and could benefit from circular economy principles. And as distributional changes take hold, new value chains need to be developed too. Colleagues, we need transformational initiatives that link climate change, biodiversity conservation, and food security needs. I have in the past used the term reciprocal mainstreaming for this. Reciprocal because we need to mainstream climate change in food security dialogues and food security in climate change dialogues. The UNFCCC has never been very good at this. We need to do so if we want to avoid this fragmentation of messages and those that hear them. In concluding, Peter, let me just remind us all that our projections indicate that the number of undernourished people in the world will likely increase to 850 million by 2030. It is to 810 million today. Food is a right, and unless we end hunger, many of the more aspirational goals will be unreachable. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. And that's a pretty powerful statement to end on, I must say. Those are stunning numbers. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, I think we'll move now straight to the video and give everybody a little break, and then we'll come back to the remaining speakers and then a question and answer session at the end. So the video that we're going to show is called Safeguarding Our Coastlines and Our Climate. It features the video is an attempt to unlock the hidden treasure trove of information about blue carbon with a message that has been created by scientists, lawyers, and artists, led by the Oxford Seascape Ecology Lab in collaboration with the Stanford Center for Ocean Solutions and the Oxford Art, Biodiversity, and Climate Network. The video features findings from the latest research published in Global Environmental Change on the opportunity for blue carbon habitats to help us to achieve net zero carbon emission targets. The team highlights how we can look to the ocean to find solutions that safeguard our coastal communities, biodiversity, and our climate. The movie will start now.
Coastal habitats, such as coastal wetlands and seagrass meadows, act as natural carbon sinks and can potentially store up to twice as much carbon as forests on land. Home to many iconic species, these natural sinks for carbon also protect coastal communities when storms hit. These blue carbon habitats could be critical for helping us to achieve net zero carbon emission targets. Net zero refers to the balance we aim to achieve between the amount of greenhouse gas produced and the amount removed from the atmosphere. As we enter the UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and approached the upcoming Global Climate Conference, COP26 in Glasgow. Highlighting new ways to store and capture carbon to achieve our climate goals and restore nature is increasingly important. Dr. Lisa Wedding and her research team at the Oxford Seascape Ecology Lab and Stanford Centre for Ocean Solutions have been leading blue carbon research and linking that with policy opportunities in coastal communities. In places where there are ambitious climate targets and vast expanses of coastal habitats, the research team is working to understand just how much these habitats can contribute to solving the climate crisis. Coastal California is valued for many reasons, such as recreation, tourism, commerce, and fisheries. California's tidal marshes and seagrass beds hold carbon storage potential too. The team mapped these habitats for their carbon storage potential, revealing the value of what was once invisible to the naked eye, so that we may conserve and protect what we can now see and understand. Their research highlights the opportunity for policymakers to consider coastal habitats as important in achieving climate goals. Although applying monetary value to these coastal ecosystems can provide incentive for their protection, many communities have cultural and spiritual ties to coastal ecosystems, and these places are an integral part of their daily lives. Blue carbon research such as this is gaining momentum and inspiring action because it provides a message of hope. Now is the time to get excited about coastal habitats and the opportunities that we all have to assist in their conservation and restoration. We can look to the ocean to find solutions that safeguard our coastal communities, biodiversity, and our climate.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for showing that video. That was good, and hope you got a little time at least to stand up and stretch while you were watching that. I certainly did. So I'm now delighted to continue with our panel of speakers, and our next speaker that I'd like to introduce is Professor Punyasloke Bhaduri. Professor Bhaduri is head of the Center for Climate Environmental Studies at the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research in Kolkata, India. Professor Bhaduri joined the Indian Institute in 2009 and since 2018 has been a professor of biological sciences there. He established and leads the Center for Climate and Environmental Studies, which is an interdisciplinary center on earth and environmental sciences focusing on solving issues relevant to society. And I'm delighted now to ask Professor Bhaduri to speak, and his topic is Climate Resilience in the Sundarbans, India, Nexus Between Science, Society and Macros.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks a lot. I work in the Bay of Bengal region, one of the fastest regions of the Indian Ocean, which is facing the wrath of the climate change. And I work in a very unique ecosystem, that Sundarbans mangrove ecosystem, which is probably the only mangrove in the world which has evolved over several thousand years with the freshwater flow. But the climate change is causing unique sets of local problems that is affecting the local communities of Sundarbans. And therefore, there is a need to develop a nexus between integrating local knowledge for solving the local problems by adopting deep science and participation of local communities. Only when these three pillars join together, we can solve the biggest problems this region faces, because it is home to more than 4 million people in the region, and also the communities are largely dependent on the biological resources, the coastal blue economy of the region. So as a first example, what I'll talk about is we are using the local knowledge and how we are addressing some of these problems. One of the examples I want to give is that here we are using the sentinel species, one of the sentinel species, the horseshoe crab, the marine horseshoe crab, as an example to understand the kind of changes climate is bringing in Sundarbans mangrove. And to understand the expanse of the horseshoe crab, we are using the local knowledge involving the local fishermen, in particular the fisherwomen communities who are tracking the climate change through the horseshoe crab. And we are doing this work jointly with the Wildlife Trust of India and also with the WWF India. The knowledge that we are gaining from there is helping us to develop new approaches to mangrove restoration, habitat restoration for horseshoe crab, which has huge implications for the livelihood of the local communities. And as part of this program, we have trained several local fishermen as eco warriors and eco protectors who are working very hard to restore the mangroves in the region. But in this case, our restoration approach is completely dependent upon local problems and local solutions. So here is one example I wanted to give to you, that the traditional knowledge of the communities living in Sundarbans are really deep. And we as scientists learn from these people when we interact and integrate that in science to solve these problems of climate change. And in this case, the traditional knowledge lies that this region is home to unique populations of oyster beds. And these oyster beds are very important because they act as a geobiometrics and an enhancer of ensuring that there is no sediment erosion, and in the process also the mangroves grow in those regions very fast. So the knowledge of the geobiometrics is completely dependent on the local knowledges. We have used this local knowledge and integrated into the nature-based solutions, focusing on the local problems. And in this case, we are adopting the mangrove plantation involving the geobiometrics concept. As a result of this approach, what is happening is in the areas where we are doing sustainable mangrove plantation using NBS approaches, we have seen over the years there has been a huge increase in the marine bioresources, and the earnings of the local communities are also increasing, although there is the impending pressure of the climate change. So the communities are showing signs of climate resilience and adaptation, such as for the eco warrior approach or the eco protector approach. The last one I wanted to highlight is something that we are slowly adopting and going forward with our partners, where we are using the traditional knowledge of finding the oyster beds, and can we go ahead and harvest these oyster beds in the long run without affecting the region. And here in this case also, it's a completely participatory approach, where the local communities, in particular the women, the fisher women, are playing a very, very important role in developing new approaches. So overall, what we are doing is the problems of Sundarbans are very focused, very local ones. There is huge sea level rise that is happening in this region. Land erosion rate is very, very high. But we have integrated our scientific approaches involving local communities and local solutions, which are traditional. And in the long run, we are helping the communities to cope up with the changing climate, build up adaptation measures, and ultimately such measures can play a very important role in developing a sustainable blue economy in light of the climate change that is happening in the region. You can go to our website www.iserpol.ac.in to look at the work that we are doing. And also I'll share in the chat window some of the videos or the films that have been made on our work, which you may look through. And if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer down the line. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much, Professor Badruri. Thanks. That's again the interesting role and the importance of traditional knowledge coming through very, very strongly here. Our next speaker is Professor Aleta Inês, and Dr. Inês is an associate professor at the Marine Science Institute at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, where she heads the Biological Oceanography and Modeling of Ecosystems, or BIOME lab. Aleta uses a combination of field, laboratory, and computer modeling approaches to investigate the interactions between environmental conditions and the base of the marine food web, and how these can impact Philippine fisheries, particularly the occurrence of harmful algal blooms. Dr. Inês will speak on our oceans and a changing climate, bringing what's out of sight and mind to the forefront in the Philippine youth. Dr. Inês, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share our experiences. Actually, I won't be talking about my research per se, but more on my experiences with the Filipino youth in a different program, specifically our climate science youth camps. And I'll just share a few slides. So the Philippines is actually situated in an exciting part of the world's oceans, and it is located at the confluence of major oceanic western boundary currents in the Pacific, with significant influence on climate processes. And the Philippines is also considered to have the most diverse marine ecosystems on the planet, making it a center of global biodiversity. Yet, for all the country's bounties, these oceans and organisms, many of which remain to be discovered, are also highly threatened from different kinds of human activities, and of course, inescapably, climate change impacts that make an already disaster-prone country even more so. Filipinos are inextricably linked to the ocean as an archipelagic nation. We are dependent on it for food, livelihoods from fishing and tourism, for resources such as natural gas and even transport. We depend on healthy marine ecosystems for protection from storms. Yet, despite the amazing seas and oceans that we have, many Filipinos are still unaware of the value of marine ecosystems, resources, and the services that we get from them. It is also a bit ironic that for people surrounded by a lot of water, most Filipinos do not know how to swim or are weak swimmers. Now, this sounds simplistic, but being unable to swim and move comfortably in these waters show that many Filipinos are also still not fully aware of or are unable to connect to the surrounding seas and oceans, and even more so, the underwater gardens and treasures in them. "I've never seen what was underneath the sea," said the boy who lives right next door to beautiful coral reefs. "I thought they," referring to corals, "were just rocks." So these are some words from the high school students that have participated in our annual climate science youth camps. Together with the Science Education Institute of the Department of Science and Technology, a group of passionate graduate students from the Marine Science Institute at the University of the Philippines, and myself have been working closely for the last decade to bring the oceans, mountains, and atmosphere to Filipino high school kids and their teachers. Every year, we select and bring together 40 high school students and 20 teachers to different coastal towns around the Philippines for an intensive 2-week educational camp full of practical experiences and hands-on activities. The aims of the Climate Science Youth Camp are multifold. First, we aim to enhance the awareness of the students and teachers about the climate change impacts and adaptive measures. Second, we want to literally and figuratively immerse them in the sciences that give them a glimpse of different concepts and methods, and for them to experience working on marine ecosystems themselves. Third, this camp is also a way to encourage the Filipino youth to pursue a career in STEM to help build the technical capacity of the country. A staple in the camp offering are ocean and climate science, but the overall story or theme has shifted between the lens of ocean-atmosphere interactions to a highlands to oceans perspective. Together with our partners and camp facilitators, we have also collaborated with meteorologists and geologists in the camps to develop a series of modules that are both informative and highly engaging. The main approaches used in the camp goes from learning foundational concepts to making the participants use different scientific methods and tools in practical settings to help them experience the ocean and mountain systems. Lastly, we also teach them how to engage with the communities themselves through interviews or group discussions to make them understand how different Filipinos value Philippine natural resources. After 2 weeks of interactive activities, our somewhat naive campers have become learned teens, and the teachers as well, who have also turned into ocean advocates. One student said, "I fell in love with the marine ecosystems and I want to learn more about it." Another student would like to think of research ideas in relation to bioshields and geohazard mapping to benefit the community. A teacher said, This climate science youth camp gave me a better perspective of my community and the world as a whole. It helped me face my fear of swimming, enabled me to appreciate marine science and meteorology. To our campers, corals are no longer just rocks, but living and breathing organisms that create structures that naturally protect Filipino communities from breaking waves. Mangrove forests go beyond from being just trees to an important habitat that is linked with coral reefs and seagrass for food production and forming a living wall against storm surges and tsunamis. Plankton become visible and tangible contributors to food webs and carbon dioxide cycling. And that undeniable link between healthy oceans and Filipino way of life becomes concrete. After 10 years of conducting this climate science youth camp and reaching high school students and teachers all over the Philippines, it still never ceases to amaze me how large a change that an up close and personal experience with the oceans and its science can create. It gives me hope that our campers now recognize how much the ocean gives them and all of the Filipino people. Though it can be a source of danger, particularly with climate change impacts, well-functioning marine ecosystems are also a source of protection and resilience from these impacts. Because of the youth camp, our graduates have a greater appreciation for our oceans. What used to be out of sight and out of mind for them have now taken on solid form and substance. We hope that each of our science campers will become more mindful of their own actions and act as a catalyst to influence the actions of those they are close to now and in the future. So thank you.
Aletta, thank you very, very much for that presentation. And that sounds like a field camp I'd love to have gone to myself as a kid. In fact, I'd like to go even now. Sounds incredible. Great work. Thank you so much indeed. So our next speaker is Silvana Birchanoff. And Dr. Birchanoff is the CFAS director of the Blue Belt program. This work is supporting the generation of new scientific work across 5 UK overseas territories. The work is very novel and cutting edge, including areas of fisheries, conservation, marine protected areas, education, habitat mapping, and climate change. Over the last 5 years, Silvana has been also supporting the scientific programs as part of the Commonwealth Marine Economies program in the Caribbean. And Dr. Birchanoff, I can find the right place in my paper here. Dr. Birchanoff will be speaking on the role of science and capacity building in addressing climate issues, examples from UKOTs and SIDS. Dr. Birchanoff, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Don't worry about it. I will be talking about this, so I will introduce the topic myself as well. Thank you very much. It's really nice to be presenting some of this work. I've been very lucky and fortunate to be working across UK overseas territories, but also small island development states in the Caribbean primarily. So today I just want to give you a little bit of overview where we are with some of these examples. I picked up 2 examples, one across the overseas territories, and I will introduce the report card that we've done for the corals, but also other ecosystems. And also want to tell you a little bit about my own work that I have been doing in Belize, looking at fisheries, but also looking at climate change effects. And primarily when I mean climate change, I mean ocean acidification as well. Why is it really important? So what? Why do we really care about this? And as you see here in my images, the diversity of these areas is absolutely outstanding. But also some of these areas also have started to take action with marine protected areas. We know these areas are really, really crucial for livelihoods, for culture. And as we hear earlier on from other speakers, capacity building is key across these systems. So to begin with, I'm going to take you all the way through the Blue Belt program to Pitcairn and Biot. As you see here in the map, the areas are really, really remote. So as well as facing climate change, obviously the geographic extent, it is also a challenge. As you see here, the Blue Belt program has many, many themes that we cover, from governance up to sustainable fisheries, but also understanding the effects of climate and biodiversity. And today, those topics are really key for us to support, but also to understand. This report card was published early this year. You can see it is online, it's available, freely available. And it covers two of the main territories of Biot and Pitcairn. As I said before, these areas are really, really important because obviously they have a fantastic biodiversity, but also across all of the coral reef areas and the marine and coastal environments, there is protection, there is action already being taken care of. So we really need to understand what are the current challenges, but what's going to be the likely future challenges as well when it comes to climate. So not only just one single factor, unfortunately, we're talking about temperature, we're talking about ocean acidification effects, sea level rise, heat waves, which all happen at different times or in combination. So therefore, this is really important in terms of ecological sense, for example, especially in some of the coral reef areas, where we have aspects of connectivity across, in some cases, we have limited amount of connectivity to repopulate some of the areas here, but also in terms of ecological recruitment. Some of these areas are challenged because obviously the amount of pool of sources that could and act as a recognition for recruitment. So in terms of the climate report card, this is really a nice document which compiles everything. We know the information, there is a lot of information available for these areas, but this report card is a really nice synthesis that is a really good example of where we are at the moment. It covers all of the current available information with regards to climate, but also cover aspects of the likelihood of what's going to happen in some of these areas, which again, it really helps us to not only to understand, but also to document and actually provide evidence. What do we know about some of these coral habitats, but also marine and coastal environments? Now, all of this information is really key and very relevant because we can bring all of the details to inform policy, but also the management of these sites. Again, when it comes to marine protected areas, once the area is designated, this is just the beginning of the work. We need to continue proactively engaging to see what else is actually yet to come so we can actually proactively take action. So it's a synthesis document, informs obviously policy, but also informs gaps, but more importantly, help us to make decisions in terms of conservation, because as we know, these areas are remote, but also we need to prioritize what are the things that we are going to concentrate on. My second example is my own work. I've been very fortunate to be working in Belize for a number of years now. And this is a program we started back in 2016, looking at the environmental chemistry of these fishing grounds. Belize is primarily very, very important for the fisheries in terms of, as you see here, lobster and conch. The two fisheries alternate, but we have seen over the recent years a decline in some of these species, the presence of these species. So not only for us is important to document the fisheries, but also to understand what are the factors that are really underlying some of these changes. And if these factors are continuing to occur in these areas, what can we do about it to monitor? What can we do about it to take action? But also to empower the local community to make sure that they can also continue the work that we've started. So we're actively engaging in the laboratory, in the field, bringing the capacity not only to Belize, but actually bringing colleagues from Belize to the UK. So we have a two-way street exchange of knowledge, which I believe is very, very key for some of these programs. And just very lastly, I want to give you a little bit of flavor why this is really important. Belize primarily, these are the first maps we've done for carbon chemistry for pH changes, but also temperature. So we have many, many dots. Today is just a snapshot of where we are at the moment. But this information, understanding variability and the change help us to really make decisions for planning, for management and conservation of the stocks, but also help us really to understand potential risks, potential opportunities in which fisheries, but also the exports, the livelihood actually, and the tradition of these systems can actually be protected in a very strong manner. But also the capacity and awareness, as I've added here, really help us to build the resilience to empower the locals to actually be able to take action when necessary. And with that, I'd like to just close my remarks. I want to also draw your attention to the Virtual Ocean Pavilion. We are presenting some of the results of this work, so do join us and stay with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Silvana, and great examples there again of importance of capacity building and working with local communities to build that knowledge and capabilities.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Devignol, and I was just testing to see if you're awake there. I went to Silvana before. I didn't mean to bypass Lisa, my apologies. So Lisa Devignol is the CITES, a nice play on words there, the CITES project officer Climate Change and Coastal Adaptation in the Ocean and Climate Platform. Within the Ocean and Climate Platform, LISA supports coastal cities and territories in their adaptation journey, the effects of sea level rise, through building partnerships and disseminating knowledge to stakeholders. And Lisa will be speaking on sharing solutions with coastal cities to tackle sea level rise. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Peter, for this introduction, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to take part in this event. It's great to hear about so many initiatives deployed worldwide for ocean and for coastal resilience. So I'm very happy to be here today. I'm going to tell you about the Cities Initiative that I work on and which is led by the Ocean and Climate Platform. Just to give you an idea of who we are as an organization, we gather a network of 97 international organizations working on the ocean, climate, and biodiversity nexus. And we launched Cities really in response to the IPCC special report on the ocean and the cryosphere, which was published in 2019, and which just really reasserted that, first of all, sea level rise is a thing. I mean, we knew already, but it reasserted that it's happening already, and that if we do not act now and drastically reduce our greenhouse gases emissions, then sea level will continue to rise by more than a meter by the end of the century. And lastly, that despite our best efforts, and we need to put our best effort into this work, but that despite everything, sea level is committed to continue rising for the next centuries to millennia. And so these projections are particularly alarming for cities, of course, for all of us, but especially for cities of all sizes, because cities gather a large number of people, of cultures, of economic assets as well. And given that nearly 70% of the urban population is expected to live along the world's coastlines by 2025, it's absolutely paramount that we start adapting now, that we start adapting our cities now to sea level rise. And so that's the objective of the Cities Project. It's really to support this process and to facilitate the development of adaptation strategies for coastal cities facing sea level rise. So to do that, we rely on scientific expertise, but also on sharing information with different stakeholders, whether it be scientific knowledge or other types of knowledge, but also concrete returns on experience, because really often when we interact with local authorities, they want to act, but they don't necessarily have the tools. They're not necessarily equipped to do so. And there's really often a problem of communication between different cities, between different stakeholders, different fields. And we really hope to contribute to bridging this. So we work in 5 regions of the world: in Europe, in North Africa, West Africa, the West Coast of the US, and Asia Pacific as a region. And we work with a variety of partners on better understanding how they face sea level rise, what happens on their territory, what actions they're taking, what works, what doesn't. And we're really trying to learn from each other on this topic, because as Angelique stated earlier, capacity building really works both ways, and we all have things to learn from each other and from the ingenious responses that are being imagined and deployed across the world already. So we work with these 5 regions because coastal adaptations is a super complex process. It requires taking into account a variety of factors: environmental, social, economic, cultural, etc. And really we need to approach it with a very diverse and holistic perspective, and take the approach of hybrid responses. So combining, let's say, gray infrastructures, so protective infrastructures, with ecosystems, and also with our very activities on the coastlines as humans, and the way we inhabit these spaces. So to do that, we organize workshops in all of the regions we work with, but we also work on disseminating scientific knowledge and other types of knowledge. And we recently launched a tool called the Solutions Map, I'll pop it on the chat later, but it's an online platform that gathers a variety of different coastal adaptation responses that are either already implemented worldwide or that are being initiated. And the objective with this map is really to collect and connect an ever-growing number of people and of initiatives to really find inspiration from whatever people are doing across the boards, and also get practical feedback on how these solutions are being thought through, designed and implemented as well. So perhaps I'll stop there on this kind of call to action and to contribution, because we need all stakeholders involved in this process. We need, of course, local communities on the coastlines, but we also need communities that live in more inland territories, because they will be affected as well. We will all be affected. And thus, I would really like for anyone who's interested in this to reach out, to contribute to the solutions map, and get in touch. So I'll be very happy to take any questions you might have afterwards. And thank you so much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That's a very interesting project, and I do want to point people to the chat where there's lots of great links, and the map of solutions link has been raised there. And one thing I'll say is, in the ROCA report over the last 5 years, it's fascinating to see how many cities have gone from being potentially threatened to actually being now under inundation as a result of climate change. It's quite dramatic. And now we move to our final presenter, Dr. Telmo Morato. Dr. Morato is a marine scientist at the Okeanos Research Unit at the University of the Azores. He leads the Azores Deep Sea Ecology Research Group, aiming to advance the understanding of deep sea ecosystems in a changing planet to inform society and sustainable management of the oceans. Dr. Morato will be speaking on the I-Atlantic project and its collaborative approaches to the assessment of resilience and health of deep sea and open ocean ecosystems across the Atlantic Ocean. Hand it over to you, Dr. Morato.
Thank you, Dr. Peter. It is a pleasure to be here today. I hope you can hear me well. And I would first like to thank all the over 100 attendees that joined us today to listen to this very nice and interesting event. So today I was asked to represent the Atlantic project and give you a short overview of what this ocean basin scale research project is doing in terms of assessing the resilience and the health of the deep sea and open ocean ecosystems across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm showing a short video that you can also see from the VOP book.
Is there supposed to be sound, Telmo?
Oh yes, sorry if the sound is
There's
not
no
coming through.
no sound coming through.
Anyway. I'm really sorry for the sound is not passing through. It is working on my computer. But basically, you can see the main activities and objectives of the iAtlantic project. One important aspect is also capacity building, knowledge sharing, both from south to north, north to south, but also west to east and east to west directions across the whole Atlantic. And some of the aspects that iAtlantic is studying, you can see on the words passing through the video. And again, apologies for the sound not going through. If you see that QR code, there's a link to the Atlantic project where you can find more information. But as I mentioned, one key aspect of the project is exploring the deep ocean. But as you all know, it's very expensive to collect information that is of paramount importance to understand, for example, the climate change impacts in the deep sea. So iAtlantic is taking this challenge very seriously, and it's not only developing real and honest capacity building actions, but it's also trying to develop tools that may allow countries like, for example, the Azores and Portugal and the Azores that don't have the capacity, the means, the money, the finance, the ROVs and the large research vessels to do deep sea exploration. So iAtlantic is developing low-cost tools that can be affordable, that are simple to use. You don't need large research vessels. You don't need large ROVs, which are really expensive equipment to buy. You don't need very expensive and technicians like ROV pilots to explore the deep ocean and to collect information that will be really important to inform managers on where should we, for example, protect our deep sea. And I was wanted to show some images of the, for example, images that we collected here in the Azores with the drift cam that we developed. And really we want to show, the Atlantic want to show that deep sea exploration can be done in any part of the world using low cost techniques. One key aspect of the project is also, of course, to know where these nice benthic deep sea communities live, where those cold water corals and sponge aggregations occur, and where most of the fish species in the Atlantic live. So this linked to the COP26 agenda. We have to admit that the deep sea plays a critical role in global climate regulation through the uptake and storage of heat and carbon dioxide. But this comes at a cost, because of the warming, acidification, and the oxygenation. These cold water corals and deep sea benthic communities will suffer and are already suffering from strong impacts. And we have demonstrated through the Atlas and the Atlantic project that many of the cold water coral species are projected to decrease significantly in their occurrence through the suitable habitat may decrease in the future. And we also projected that there are very limited climate refugia in the North Atlantic, and we want to expand this work with our colleagues from the South Atlantic. And these areas should be regarded as priority areas for conservation. We also projected that important deep sea fish species that are used for food and commercial purposes may also suffer from a change in their suitable habitats. And we have projected that many of these deep sea species may migrate towards northern latitudes and not become available to some of the local communities further in the south. So iAtlantic is working across the Atlantic Ocean to complete a health check of the deep sea and open ocean ecosystems, but also to provide the best evidence to managers so that we can kind of protect or back off human pressures in key places and given deep sea ecosystems and open ocean ecosystems a chance to regenerate and recover. But this of course, to work, and we all know, and we have seen early today, but to work, we must limit carbon dioxide emissions as a top priority for our future political agendas, not just for the oceans, as we saw, but also for the future of human life and life in our planet. Thanks for the opportunity to give this short talk here today.
Thank you very much, Telmo. That's a fascinating project. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about that. And it links beautifully back with some of the opening comments of His Excellency Puna, because of course, the importance of the BBNJ treaty and making sure that that comes into reality. So thank you very, very much. So thank you all of our speakers. Wow, my brain is overloaded with all of the information and incredible presentations. I do want to just ask Miko now if there are any questions that have been submitted by the attendees. Hi, Mika.
Thank you, Peter. I think all the presentations have been so great and clear. We haven't received questions in the question and answer box. So you may want to invite panelists to raise some questions to each other.
Yes, absolutely. And I know Miriam will tell me once we're out of time. I don't know how far we can go, Miriam, in terms of time. It's in Glasgow here. It's 11:15. So how long do we have?
We have 15 minutes, Peter, and I do have questions for Jill.
Yes, I think there were a couple of questions that were submitted for Jill. And why don't, do you have those in front of you, Miriam, if you would like to?
Yes, I do.
Good.
The first
Okay.
question for Jill is, what role can nature-based solutions play in climate adaptation and mitigation?
That's a great question, and I'm sure others would be interested in speaking on that as well. But why don't we give Jill Jill the first crack at that?
Sure, absolutely. And that's a great question. And like you said, Peter, I think it's come up in a lot of these presentations and remarks today. I would just touch on, as I mentioned in my remarks, Conservation International is doing a lot of work in both blue carbon and green gray infrastructure, and looking at how nature-based solutions can really be used on the ground in adaptation work, but also what role can they play in these climate international policy discussions like we're having here in Glasgow this week and next. And I would just point to, when you think about nature-based solutions and particularly blue carbon, we often say that blue carbon is a triple win nature-based solution because it both has such a large role and opportunity as an adaptation measure for protecting coastal ecosystems or protecting coastal communities, from sea level rise, from storm surge, from other impacts from climate change. It also has huge mitigation potential for sequestering carbon on a per area basis. It's the most efficient ecosystem on Earth. And conversations up to this point, I think, have traditionally really focused on terrestrial ecosystems. And so shifting the conversations to include oceans and coasts when thinking about mitigation potential is really key. And then lastly, when it comes to blue carbon, we have been working a lot with carbon credits and how can blue carbon ecosystems really start being a larger part in the carbon crediting and accounting conversation. In Colombia, we have been working with communities and partner organizations on the Caribbean coast to issue the first blue carbon credits for mangrove restoration and conservation, which has been just a fantastic experience and something that we hope to see scaled up significantly in the years to come.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much, Jill. One of the things in the ROCA report over the years, what we've seen, I mentioned this earlier, is this, this growth in terms of what you would call multifaceted responses to climate change. So, well, it's not just, adaptation over here, mitigation here, and doing other things in silos. It really coming together and addressing, multiple impacts. And so where you can, have initiatives and projects that combine adaptation and mitigation, building resilience, and increasing, prosperity too, from a more sustainable basis. This is absolutely is win-win. And just on the issue of nature-based solutions, that was something that was right in the first ROCA report. Nature-based solutions was a focus of the adaptation section, and an organization that I'm involved with called Coastal Zone Canada, which I'm a past president of. And they have developed a community of practice around nature-based solutions, and these include both not just in the Atlantic Pacific coast of Canada, but also on the Great Lakes and also in the Arctic as well, where of course we're seeing huge impacts of climate change on natural environments and communities. And the Coastal Zone Canada does have a booth on the Virtual Oceans Pavilion, so I do encourage you to check that out. And there's a section on the communities of practice for nature-based solutions. Does any other panelists want to comment on nature-based solutions, such an important way?
Yes, we are getting in questions. We do have a question from Lena. Perhaps this may be well addressed by Jill. Are there hopes that blue carbon ecosystems will be more integrated into the UNFCCC processes and mechanisms? Are the current gaps in the climate framework limiting to blue carbon work? Will you be willing to respond to that, please?
Sure, absolutely. The answer is yes, and I think that there is certainly a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of need for action. The paper that we linked earlier, right after my remarks, goes into a lot of detail, probably more detail than some people would want to read, looking at every single constituted body relevant to blue carbon and oceans and coasts, and looks at, where are the specific points that parties could really push for to integrate nature-based solutions, particularly blue carbon, oceans, coasts. One of the key areas is looking at countries' NDCs and ensuring that blue carbon specifically, but oceans and coasts more broadly, can be accounted for and incorporated there.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Jill. There are quite a few questions with regard to blue carbon. So I might actually refer to another one, which is asking about the development of carbon markets for blue carbon. What is being done to attract investors to invest in ocean-based solutions? Jill, and if other panelists would like to respond to this question, please.
I can touch on that very briefly, but then I would open it up to others as well. I think, incorporating blue carbon into the more mainstream carbon markets has so much potential because it creates this longer term investment opportunity and makes it intriguing for investors to really want to conserve and restore coastal blue carbon ecosystems. And so I would encourage attendees to check out the project that I mentioned that Conservation International is involved in Colombia. The project is called Vida Manglar, or mangrove life in Spanish. That is one example of this working on the ground. And like I said, it's that type of work that we're really hoping to see more of in the years to come.
Would other panelists like to comment on that? Because the issue of financing, of course, has come up, I think, in most of the presentations. And perhaps it's not only in terms of attracting investors to invest in carbon markets, but in other aspects as well. Anybody else want to comment on that question? Yeah, Manuel. Oh, you even know how to raise your hand. That's well done.
We've been doing this for a couple of years now.
Yeah, it's kind of.
No, I just wanted to add that I think that is one thing that is very important is to how to frame the solution so that it brings people on board. And for example, we have a mangrove restoration program going on in Senegal as part of the Coastal Fisheries Initiative for some time. But the main entry point to the restoration of mangroves was actually the rebuilding of the fisheries and the protection of the oyster beds, because in that particular area that we work in the Delta in Senegal, mangroves were being cut in order to harvest the oysters that are attached to the mangrove. And so we actually sold the project not just as a blue carbon issue, but as an issue that tackles several issues at the same time. And so dealing with it or presenting in the right way is what makes a project successful or not. Another example is that we have been working now in quite a few places in Zanzibar, in Tunisia, in building seaweed farming. And seaweed farming is not blue carbon, because the carbon goes back to the atmosphere when the seaweed is used, but it is a process of absorbing the carbon and removing the carbon from the atmosphere for some time. But that is also a process where you protect the beds for fisheries and young fish that are using the seaweeds as a protection. So you're rebuilding the fisheries at the same time as you are addressing other issues. So this multiplicity of messaging of what we can do for a particular solution is crucial for success.
Yeah.
Manuel, thank you very much. Well, building upon your response, can I also raise last question on blue carbon? Are there new governance or policies needed to be able to capture the triple win of blue carbon, as you have just mentioned?
Actually, Miko, I was just thinking that's that question from Ruth. Thank you for that, and it's a great question. But I actually think it's also a question that can be opened up because beyond blue carbon, because I do think one of the big issues that we face is that a lot of the projects and a lot of the initiatives that we see on the ground, in many ways, are being carried out in the absence of more overall government policy and then governance. And so
that's right.
I really do feel that that the the necessity of some sort of governance structure that engages integrated coastal management and ocean management is really critical. That we can't go on just having small projects having their impact, doing good things, but then not sort of scaling up and not being done in the context of overall governance. So I think this is something that addresses all aspects that we've covered this morning or this afternoon or at night, wherever it is you are. But it's not just something that addresses blue carbon. But your question, Ruth, was specific to blue carbon. I just thought I'd open it up a bit, but perhaps somebody wants to comment on the question in relation to blue carbon specifically. Jill, you've generated a lot of questions there, so don't feel shy if you want to chirp in on this.
Sure. Can you just restate that one more time? I think I missed the heart of that question.
Are there new governance or policies needed to be able to capture the triple win of blue carbon?
That's a great question. I think that, at the heart of that, it's partly, communication and ensuring that, when, well, I'll use the UNFCCC and COP as an example, when conversations are talking about ecosystems and adaptation and mitigation, a lot of those conversations have traditionally focused on terrestrial ecosystems and their potential. And part of it is just, ensuring that policymakers and negotiators are thinking about oceans and coasts in these conversations. I think that is a big point. But then also, there are very specific parts of policy and the UNFCCC bodies where specific changes and specific mention of ocean and coasts are very valuable. For instance, the global stocktake process, ensuring that questions are included for ocean and coastal ecosystems and their mitigation and adaptation potential, and identifying specific knowledge gaps, both in that scientific process, others, and financial processes to really understand where we need to be directing climate finance, that is very crucial that we carve out a unique space for oceans and coasts and what considerations are needed.
Great, thank you.
Maybe I can add, that's okay?
Yes,
Peter?
please do.
Yeah, I think I just want to add what Jill has said, a very important point. And I think one other aspect that does come down is while we have a greater understanding of the policy and the technical knowledge of blue carbon management, our social knowledge of blue carbon management is rather poor, I would say, or unrepresented. I think, how the land use, the traditional knowledge, how these components, capacity building, I think, on blue carbon management. I think these are three pillars where we really need to have a lot of investment at the governance scale and also at non-government scale. So I think both entities need to come together, and then only we can have a very effective policy that can be implemented for a long-term blue carbon management in many regions of the oceans.
Thank you. Are there anybody else want to comment before we're at the hour? So it's 11 o'clock in the morning here in Glasgow, and wherever it is on the hour where you are, we are at time. So I would like to just take this time to thank all of the presenters and panelists, and whether you can virtually clap or just, I want to just applaud you all for your presentations. Thank you so much. A very rich and engaging session. And I think that, in terms of looking at, the overall outcome, first of all, thank you to His Excellency Secretary, the General Commissioner Puna, because he really started us off well by raising that challenge, and all the presentations really deal with aspects of his challenge. And I think a number of key things for me at this seminar, that first of all, it's action now, can't be tomorrow, not later, action now, no more time to waste. The accelerating impacts of climate change mean that adaptation is not an option, it's a requirement, and we need to ensure that as we do adapt, we also contribute to mitigation and for creating new sustainable opportunities for new economic prospects for communities. The importance of finance is critical. The integration and valuing of traditional knowledge and local engagement is essential. And we also need to ensure that we can conserve and manage all parts of the ocean, both within and beyond national jurisdiction. And I think probably the single, if one had to summarize the outcome of this, it is that at COP26, we need to raise ambition on emissions reduction, mitigation, adaptation, and finance. And if we don't do that, we're going to just be in bigger trouble when we come back again in next year and the year after. We'll be basically talking about the same thing with less and less optimism. So the time is up. I want to thank the panelists. Thank you all for attending, wherever all of those of you were listening in. Thank you for your questions and for your discussion. And I think the session will be available and recorded for you to view afterwards. And I do encourage you to follow up all the links for the great information that we're sourcing all of the presentations you heard this morning. So on behalf of myself and all of the panelists, thank you for attending. Thank you for watching. Panelists, thank you for your presentations. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Goodbye now.
Thank you.
Take care.